for the session. And Erin is my helper today. So if you have any questions, you can email either of us or put in the chat. And Erin will be monitoring the chat and we'll go ahead and get started. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. Each presenter will go ahead and present, and we'll have some time before we switch on to the next presenter to answer any questions. And if there's time at the end, we'll go ahead and have an open discussion. The session is being recorded, and we'll make the recording available on YouTube on the website post. If you want to stay in tune and connected, go ahead and register and you'll receive an email when those recordings are up. But I guess without further ado, you'll see information on the website, our code of conduct, and if you are using social media, you can use the hashtag UCGIS week. We do have an event survey that Erin will put a link in at the end, but we have one survey for the entire event. So we would love to have your feedback that will help us sort of think about moving forward with a future UCGIS week. So it's our second annual UCGIS week. We're excited to have a wonderful lineup today. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm gonna go ahead and first introduce Ali Talakoob. Hopefully I pronounced that properly. But we'll go ahead, and Ali is an AC intern working for California State Parks. He received his BS degree in architectural engineering in 2018. After that, he studied GIS at American River College and obtained his AS degree in 2021. Current work includes performing analysis on provided data utilizing Esri products and developing 2D and 3D models using UAS imagery files. So Ali, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Amy. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So I'm going to share my screen and start. So does everyone see my screen? I just wanted to check.
Yes, we do.
Okay, wonderful. So here you are. Greetings. My name is Ali Talakoob, and my presentation is about digital documentation of Santa Cruz cultural heritage. So about me, as Amy said, I'm an American Conservation Experience intern, a GIS intern working with California State Parks. And my prior studies include studying a bachelor's degree in architectural engineering, and also an AS that I got it recently from American River College in Geography and Information System. And for next slide. So these are the projects that I have worked during my internship with state parks. And amongst them, I would like to point out to two specific projects. First one is Cascade Ranch Barn, and second one is Pigeon Point Lighthouse. So this is the first project, Cascade Ranch Barn. So Cascade Ranch Barn was within Ano Nuevo State Park and lost in 2020 in the LNU complex fire. For centuries, the Ohlone tribe lived in this area, and the significant changes began with the expedition of Gaspar de Portola. Cascade Ranch Barn itself was built in 1860s, and the reason that I'm going to focus on this project is the fact that LNU lighting complex fire destroyed the house, and so this is the only trace of the house that we made it online. In this slide, I used Agisoft Metashape, and I generated the desired deliverables, 2D and 3D products using image-based modeling. On the left, you see the 3D model of the building. And on the right, you can see my 2D documents. However, this process looks straightforward. There are some problems that we would need to deal with. The first one was the structural distortions due to weathering and breakage It was our primary concern, and this issue required us to create a 3D model using a third-party software, which was Sketchup. And in addition, there are specific modifications needed in order to precisely develop the barn's elevation and its design.
Hi, Ali.
So, yes?
I just want to let you know you're in presenter view.
Yes, I'm okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. And so that was it. As you may see in the initial process, we have some distortions. And using SketchUp, as you may all know, SketchUp is a 3D modeling software. Many professionals using it. As an architect, I started working with it 4 years ago, and it is developed by Trimble, and it provides the opportunity for all users to accurately model what they have in mind. And this picture, as you see, shows the initial model that I generated for Cascade Ranch Barn. And to ensure this concept that our conceptual model is accurate, I utilize the provided US imagery data for double checking the measurements. My next step would using this initial concept as a base and taking it into Adobe Photoshop. Sorry. So in Adobe Photoshop, using the initial model in SketchUp, I developed new textures in order to fix the distortions. Also, the developed materials are modified to make sure to ensure that our models match the initial model, the real life model. And as you may see, the picture on top shows the initial process, and the picture on bottom is the result after working with SketchUp and Adobe Photoshop. And here are the 4 elevations for Cascade Ranch Barn using the initial UAS provided, our conceptual model in SketchUp, and also post-processing in Adobe Photoshop 2021. So in addition to generating 3D documents, I was asked to prepare technical documents according to HABS standards using Autodesk AutoCAD. So for some of you that don't know what HABS is a historic American building survey, and there are a series of regulations and standards that used to develop documentation for historical structures and buildings. In next page, you will see now, in addition to the 3D version, we have a 2D document that is going to be used by archaeologists and other related experts for decision making. So I'm going to move on to my second project, Pigeon Point Lighthouse. Pigeon Point Lighthouse, it is located in Pigeon Point Light Station State Park. It has an original name. The original name was Whale Point, due to the fact that gray whales crossing the point. And after the Clipper carriers collision in 1853, the name was changed to honor the ship. And it's interesting, it is important to mention that Pigeon Point raises appreciation for natural values for both scientific and popular points of view. And there are many restoration efforts that happened along the years, and since my project is focused on one of them, I don't want to go through details. But if you are interested in learning more about the state park, you can click on the picture. I will provide the presentation I will share it with UC GIS. Hopefully you will access to it and you can just click on it and you will have access to the park's official brochure and you can learn more. So we are going to start with our first attempt. The first attempt, as you see, resulted in a distorted rendering. The issue was resolved by redefining processing parameters, such as surface type option. We choose arbitrary in order to fix the issue. For our second attempt, okay, the first model was distorted. This for next time, in order to enhance the orthomosaic quality, I performed post-processing using Adobe Photoshop for my initial UAS imagery in order to increase the shadow detail. This shadow detail includes brightness and sharpness. So in this picture, you can see it. I'm going to just do a quick review about Agisoft Metashape. For people who don't have the experience of using Metashape, Metashape is really sensitive with the dark spots, and it doesn't create a 3D model well. So in order to get a good result, we needed to increase the brightness and also the sharpness in order to have the edges of the building or edges of the photo absolutely right. So we performed this process for all provided UAS imagery. In third attempt, now we have all our reprocessed images as an input, and we put them in Agisoft Metashape, and we start processing it. And our deliverables include orthomosaic, DEM, dense cloud, and a 3D model that you see in this picture. So in order to measure our accuracy is one of the most important aspects of our project. In order to measure it, we cross-checked the other measurements the other measurements available for us, and 1 foot distance between the published height and the developed model was observed. So our height was 115. The real life was 115 feet, and ours was 113.8. And in this slide, I would like to talk to you about 2 available softwares for processing UAS imageries. One is Esri Drone to Map, and the other one is Agisoft Metashape. Using Drone to Map is more functional for small parcels of land or the structure with less amount of details. But when it comes to modeling historical buildings, or you have a sophisticated elevation in that building that we want to preserve it, or we are processing the huge chunk of land, we need to use Agisoft Metashape because it would give us a better result and be much more accurate result. So, however, the final model that you've seen on last slide was accurate. Some distortions were result from limiting factors. We shouldn't forget them. The limiting factors include the wind speed. The wind speed affected the drone and for sure affected the quality of images. And about the mentioned project in this presentation, I would like to say that all the mentioned projects are here to assist archaeologists and other related experts with the process of decision-making and reviving historical structures. As a GIS intern working for California state parks, this was the first step. This was the initial step to preserve and restore historical structures in California. My passion and goal for future is to assist California State Park with future restoration efforts to preserve and redevelop historical structures. In the end, I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation to 2 individuals who helped me a lot, I can't say enough, with both my education and my internship. Dennis Jafke, senior archaeologist in California State Parks, my supervisor, my first supervisor, she helped me a lot during this internship. And Paul Weiss, my instructor and my mentor at American River College, whom I had the honor to work with in these 2 years. and in both academic and professional fields. Thank you so much. If you have any other questions, I'm here to ask, and if I'm here to respond. And if you'd like to talk to me more, here are my email addresses, and we can talk. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, Ali. Does anyone have any questions? You can either raise your hand and unmute yourself if you would like, or you can put your question in the chat box. We have a few minutes for questions. And Ali, I guess I'll go ahead and ask my first question in the sense of,
Please.
Sort of how long did each one of those models sort of take place, or how long did it take to process, right? And thinking about the longer term, one building, one structure versus something of sort of doing that for more parks and more features across the California.
That's a really good question. So to respond to it, I would like to say it absolutely depends on various factors, including the provided images, the US images that the parks gave it to me. It depends on the quality and what time, how much time do we have. If there's a super important project for us, okay, we want the highest accuracy, highest quality possible. We would have 5 or 6 different phases I would usually do. We had one with lowest quality, with a little bit medium. And in each phase, we started to make sure that all the elevations are accurate. There are no distortions. So I would make around 3 to 5 processing tasks. And the final one, with the highest quality, better say, that you saw in these slides, the highest one, sometimes it takes around 12 hours or 15 hours. Yeah, but if you use the Agisoft cloud-based, that is a new service that they have, that would be much less of time, and it doesn't take your CPU, and that would be much easier, but it has some limitations.
Thank you. That's great. And then I'll say as a follow-up, it also reminds me that there's some work that's happening in the UC San Diego Library in the Digital Media Lab that really sort of aligns exactly with what you're doing, but thinking about what happens, right, sort of if you don't have a UAV to capture imagery of a feature that's already disappeared. And so they were able to go through and take sort of a collection of photographs to be able to piece together things using Agisoft. So I'll follow up with you on that, but it reminds me of some of the interesting work that's happening across the institutions. So
thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you. So if there's more questions, right, we have the chat here you can follow up with, and we also have Slack as well. So yeah. I'll go ahead and we'll switch it over then to our next person if there's no more questions. Erin, am I missing anything in questions or hands raised?
No, I think we're good. We're a little ahead of time, but I don't notice anyone coming in specifically for presentations. So yeah, I think we could go ahead and safely proceed.
Okay. Wonderful. So Justin, if you want to go ahead and get your screen sharing going. So our next presenter is Justin Tran from UC Santa Barbara on space and time for the Milpa Forest Garden Cycle. Justin is an archaeologist and geospatial analyst at the Mesoamerican Research Center at UC Santa Barbara, studying historical land use techniques of the Maya at El Pilar. He received his BA in anthropology with an archaeological emphasis from UC Santa Barbara. Justin, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Amy, and it's good to meet you all. So yes, my name is Justin Tran with the Mesoamerican Research Center at UCSB, or MARC as we call it. So I hope everyone's having a great day. But yes, so I have the pleasure of presenting to you some of the research we've been conducting at MARC, mainly spearheaded by our director, Dr. Annabelle Ford, who is herself an archaeologist at UC Santa Barbara. And it's titled Space and Time for the Milpa Forest Garden Cycle. In this presentation, I'll explain the continuing work of my colleagues and I in constructing a model of sustainable land use in the Maya forest and examining the settlement and environmental patterns of the ancient Maya at the site of El Pilar. And our project aims to showcase the Maya forest as a domesticated landscape, recognizing that Maya land use is tied to an extensive production cycle called the Milpa cycle. And I'll explain a little bit more about what that all means in just a moment here. So to provide some context, here is where the city of El Pilar is situated in Central America. It's a classic Maya center nestled within the forests of the central lowlands of the Maya region, straddling the border of modern-day Belize and Guatemala and just south of Mexico. You see here where it's situated in the Yucatan Peninsula, as well as some major Maya sites that are within distance of it. And on the bottom left here, you can see the image of the Civic Center of El Pilar. And of course, none of this imaging could be possible without LiDAR remote sensing, which has enabled us to kind of penetrate the forest canopy to visualize the landscape beneath the trees. So it's an extremely integral part of our work. So to describe a brief background of maybe why it is we're conducting this research, big part of it is exploring alternatives to the prevailing theory that a lot of scholars posit, that the Maya overused their landscape, clearing forests and engaging in extensive and destructive field agriculture. The theory that we adhere to, which you can see comparing what I've just described with what we believe, is that the Maya had managed their forests in a much more organized manner, blurring the lines between forest and field to make the most of both forms of land use. And they would have managed their land between two dimensions, which are infields, which are home forest gardens surrounding their places of residence, and outfields, areas in which the Milpa cycle actually takes place. And so you may be wondering what exactly is the Milpa cycle. And so it is a form of land use that incorporates both agroforestry techniques and field agriculture, determining that everything has potential and seeing cultivation limited only by slope and any other external factors, which I can go into in a moment. The Milpa Forest Garden enables the Maya to both grow crops for sustenance as well as cultivate economic plants and other kinds of trees, things like construction material and medicine, and as well as preserving biodiversity and providing a habitat for animals within a natural environment. You see here in the image the progression of one cycle. The forest first is cleared for a Milpa field where the crops are grown, and then allowed over about a 20-year cycle to grow back into a natural forest canopy, which harbors wide varieties of flora and fauna. And all the while, these natural forests are also managed, and the plants within them are selected for in order to provide as many economic resources as possible. So our study partially revolves around the dynamics of Maya urban populations. And so to get a sense of that, we should examine their habitations. You see here the expanding settlement survey of El Pilar over the decades. And all these black lines that you see here are architectural features, the majority of which are called mounds. And these mounds are the remains of houses, of which we recorded about 1,080 at El Pilar. And these mounds form the building blocks of what we call residential units. And residential units, or RUs for short, are organized into groups, primary and secondary residential units. So the primary RUs, or PRUs as we call them, are the principal sites of habitation by Maya families around which they center many of their day-to-day activities. And the secondary RUs are, well, as they're called, secondary structures that may be things like field houses or storage that are not necessarily used for living, but are still structures nevertheless. And so the way that we determine PRUs is whether they're two or more structures and or the presence of plaza architecture surrounding them. And secondary RUs are more solitary. And so the PRUs are particularly important because they allow us to calculate populations. You see our math here on the bottom right. We have identified 518 PRUs in a 14 square kilometer area at El Pilar. And using the number of about 5.5 people living in every PRU, that's an estimate, we get approximately 2,849 people living at LPLR in a highly dense urban area. You can see here on the right as well a picture of what these mounds that I've been describing look like in the field, and you can get a sense of why it's so important that we use remote sensing to get an idea where these are, because if you were just walking, it'd be very difficult to actually know that there's architecture there. So now that we've defined the Milpa cycle and provided some other context, we ask the next question, which is what exactly needs to be accounted for when modeling agricultural land use in a spatial sense. So there's some basic elements that must be considered in our model. The presence of architecture is pretty self-explanatory. After all, you can't cultivate a field where there's buildings in the way. So in our model, we exclude all areas of architecture, both civic and domestic, and denote that the area is not eligible for cultivation. Another thing that needs to be considered is erosion, which is primarily managed through an active consideration of the natural slope of the terrain. And we suggest that there are two ranges, a minimum and maximum that the Maya would have limited themselves to when contending for slope. One using land beneath 7 degrees of slope and one beneath 15 degrees. And you can see here on the bottom right, this is a 7 degree slope. And if I progress forward, you can see how much land is freed up when expanding the conditions of what kind of land you're farming on according to slope. And recalling what I discussed earlier about the different forms of cultivation in fields and outfields. Infields are the home forest orchards and gardens centered around PRUs in a mean 4,000 square meter area around their residential lot. And outfields are areas beyond the PRU where the actual Milpa cycle takes place. In the left, you can see how we represent the system in our model. The blue circles are those infields, and the teal color represents that sea of cultivable outfields where the Milpa cycle is taking place. And you can see on the right here, this is an image of what an infield home garden would actually look like in a real world setting. So now that we've seen the various exclusion categories for land use, how exactly did we go about visualizing it? In using GIS, we've created a model of the Milpa cycle at LPLR that takes into account all the things I've mentioned up to this point. You see here our workflow. First, we isolated the 7 degree and 15 degree ranges of slope by using a base slope grade raster at LPLR. After that, we go about defining RUs and generating these red extent polygons around architecture. And it's in this stage 2 that we identify which of these RUs are primary RUs. And from these PRUs, we generate the 4,000 square meter infield buffers. And then from these 3 pieces of data, the slope ranges, the architectural exclusion areas, and the infield buffers, we can combine them to form a comprehensive view of what is considered ineligible land at LPLR for the Milpa cycle. And then conversely, using that, we can find what land is eligible at LPLR. And you see the end result of our work here, taking into account all the factors I've described. So on the left, our 7% model, which provides 6.6 square kilometers of eligible land, and on the right, our 15% model, which provides 3 square kilometers more under expanded conditions. And so you can see the differences between the two are significant, and they are particularly important when considering the next element of our analysis, which is what exactly are the implications for subsistence. So we've defined the area that falls into cultivable land, and now we seek to answer whether that's sufficient enough to provide for the population we determined. So from here, we consider subsistence needs by using maize as a benchmark. That would have been the principal crop of the Maya in their civilization. At average yields of maize, meaning an approximate harvest of 1,144 kilograms per hectare, they would require about 9.1 kilometers of land to feed the 2,849 people living at LPLR. At average yields, you see the 7% model only provides 73% of subsistence needs. That is 6.6 square kilometers out of a required 9.1 square kilometers. The 15% model is substantially better, providing 100% of subsistence needs, meaning that the Maya are able to sustain their entire population by just farming at an average intensity within this determined space. So how exactly does this factor into the earlier debate of forest and field? On the left here, we see a model of what some scholars contend the Maya did with their landscape, which was clearing the forests almost entirely, converting all of it into fields and preventing that natural forest landscape from developing. This model is insufficient. While it may feed them for a few years at best, it ignores the multitude of other required natural resources that would have been acquired from the forests. And on the right, we see the results of our analysis, which is a model that incorporates the Milpa cycle and suggests that the land falls into different stages of cultivation throughout a 20-year cycle. So you can see the yellow here is that Milpa field stage, and then as it gets bright green and then into darker green, that is the land maturing into a natural forest canopy. So evidently this system, as we've proven, can work and cannot provide only food, but also economic resources in a conservative and effective manner. So at the end of our study, what conclusions have we drawn? Well, we created a model that attempts to approximately recreate the Milpa cycle at LPLR, taking into account conditions of slope, urban development, and traditional methods of Maya agriculture. We see that under the right conditions, the Milpa cycle can provide sustenance for an urban population without compromising a natural forest environment. And of course, there's still a lot more to do in our research. We aim to continue it and improve our model, taking into account even further limitations of farming landscapes, such as natural soil suitability, which I'm excited because we're starting to get that data and we can finally take a look at it because that's a very crucial part of it. As well as looking at things like the exact needs for things like architectural construction resources, which would have determined the growth of trees in this landscape. So all this in order to provide an even clearer view of the Maya way of life and how they protected the environment that they called home and that they have thrived in for millennia. I believe that's it. So thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Here's our contact info. My director, Dr. Annabelle Ford's info, as well as some acknowledgements of people who were very integral in conducting this research: Thomas Krimmel, Jason Wu, and Sherman Horn. So thank you all again.
Thank you, Justin. Wonderful presentation. So if there's any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand, you can unmute yourself. We'll call on you, unmute yourself, and you can ask it directly. And also, and I guess I'll go ahead and start. And Justin, thinking, you know, like so many questions, and I want to start in like the details, and I'm thinking, how do I sort of consolidate them into one? Because, you know, thinking that, so how did you come up with sort of the 7% and the 15% slopes as sort of those factors? So
that is based off of prior research, which was done by a colleague of ours, Dr. Scott Feddick. He has gone in and classified these different slope categories and kind of put a consensus on what kinds of land that the Maya would have used. And according to his research, we found that there were different ranges, land below 7% and land below 15%, that were probably considered optimal for cultivation by the Maya. And so it's based off of his research that we determined those slope grades.
Thank you. Okay, one more question, sorry. And if raise your hands, put them in the chat. And thinking about, you know, sort of this research and understanding now the Milpa cycle and sort of being able to have more sustainable practices, is this research also now being expanded to other Mayan sites, or is it still like understanding, right, sort of the larger single site versus a culture as a whole?
Yeah, so so this research that we're doing, we do think that the Milpa cycle would have been, it was not just limited to the people of LPLR, it would have been something that was widespread throughout the Maya world. And so we are at the moment trying to see if this model can also be applied at the site of Tikal, which is one of the larger and considerably more urban sites. And so we are curious about seeing how this model holds up there, because it's much denser and it's also a much more, like I said, much more urban site. And so we wanted to see how the Milpa cycle holds up there and whether that would be sufficient for sustaining populations. But that's the only site that we've really expanded to, but we do think that it's something that was universal throughout the Maya world.
Great.
I also have a question here. So from John Jab, do you want to tell us about moving to a relational data model? Yeah, so we've had discussions about this, John, I believe. Yeah, our Mark is working on kind of overhauling the data right now. Our data previously existed in a very informative way, in a very informative state, but it was not necessarily in a state that we could answer a lot of questions with. And so we do want to make the model be a relational database so that all of the data within our database, the architecture, vegetation, and things like labor investment, which is how much work is being put into actually constructing these. We are trying to get all of that data related so that we can answer deeper and more compelling questions about the things being done at LPLR, but that is currently in progress, and we really hope to hopefully put out how exactly we're making that data go together, but that's going well. And then another question from Matthew Mies, I hope I pronounced that right. Is there a type of data for this site that you really wish you had? Like I said, soil is a really big thing. We are working on getting that data, and there's people down in Belize and Guatemala that are working on getting that soil data for us. But that's obviously a huge part. Soil is basically, I mean, without good soil, that's kind of a foundation thing for agriculture. So that's a type of data that we really wish we had, but it's coming along nicely. That's what I can think of as really a pressing need for us right now for this data or for this model. So hope that answers your question.
Wonderful. And so I think there's a few more questions that I have, but Justin, if you're okay, if we'll put them in the chat and you can respond or respond to them if we have more time at the end.
Of course.
We can go ahead. So great. So our next presenter is Jamie Jamison from UCLA, and Jamie is the collection manager at the UCLA Library Data Science Center. So her presentation is Google Places API to create a geospatial database. So Jamie, we'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
So yes, I'm a collection manager for the Dataverse repository, and usually my job involves helping people park their data, but sometimes they also want to find data. A question I've had sometimes by students, by researchers is, how do I find a data set of a specific thing, whether it's grocery stores or hospitals within a geographic area? So this is a little project that came up recently outside of work that I kind of used as a model for the workflow of how do you use Google Places API and make your own data set. What this was is for a nonprofit group that was having an event. After we opened up post-COVID, they're having an event at the Torrance Community Center, and in normal years, pre-COVID, food would be sold, but because of the restrictions, they couldn't. So I came up with a map for them, finding what food is available within a radius of the Torrance Community Center. And I made a paper map, not because they're not internet comfortable, but because the Wi-Fi was sort of spotty. So having something that you can hand to people who aren't from the area, they can look at it and kind of eyeball, where will I eat? So that's how this project started. The Google Maps platform has a Places API, and you can search, with different categories, finding things like hospitals, again, grocery stores, different types of geographic locations. You can do it by proximity, by a text string, and when you run this, you get a chunk of information for each item that it finds. Besides the Places API, you can also use place details. Now, what's interesting is, say, for example, I ran this on Places and it gave me names and addresses, but no phone numbers. So I had to run the place details to get phone numbers. So some of it's split up in odd ways. And another idiosyncrasy was that the name field in Places no longer is restricted to place names. So it's a good idea to also pull your name in the place details just to make sure you've got the right name of the place you're looking for. So they have three in places, gives you three basic kind of searches. You can say take text input and like find a place by a name, address, or a phone number. Now, what I was using was I used both, or I tried out both nearby and text searches. Nearby is looking for places within a specific area. That could be, say, I want food to go in Torrance. That would be one way to do that. Or the one I finally used, it was text search. So you can search for places with a string. So I was using takeout in the address of this community center, and that's the one I finally used. So you've got some variety in how you search for places. I got this from the Google's developer information. So they have a whole lot of places. Now, interestingly, I was using the search term takeout, and takeout is not on the list, and it worked, but they just give you an idea of what kinds of places, you know, mostly urban area type things like stores, bus stops, subway stations. So you can search for you know, one or more things in a geographic area. So this just gives you an idea of what I believe these things probably are indexed by Google's you know, Google's algorithm, but this is some of the terms they have. And the documentation, and I was a little new to using this API, I've got to admit, they have a lot of information. And one thing that was particularly helpful is they give you code examples in different languages. Now I'm showing you the Python examples because I processed my data with Python, but you've got, you know, JavaScript, Ruby, you've got a variety of things. And I basically used their code as a starting point. So they're very helpful that way. The basic syntax is, you know, you have the maps API, and I'm using place. And so you have either, you know, the next thing over here where it says nearby search or place from text, that's the type of search you're doing. So that's the next part. Now, after that, output. Now, output means you get your output either as JSON or XML. I was using JSON. So, you know, you have two types of output. And then the parameters are where you're going to have your search terms and your API key. One of the things, and you get these chunks of information about each place to find. So one of the things they have on there is the place ID. And that's what you're going to use. The place ID is what you'll use to connect it to the detail search if you need more information. And this is what a detail search looks like. In this case, I had the place ID, which I'd just gotten from doing the places. And then I wanted the name, the phone number, you know, website. And then of course you have to use this API key for everything. So that's sort of their syntax. Now, this is pulled out of my Python code, however imperfect. And my search query was find takeout food places near the address of this Torrance Community Center. And so you can see over there, it's a text search, takeout near, and then you just put in the whole address. And as my Python code was kind of chugging through the information, I could pull out the name, even though the name may not, according to Google, the name may not be a name, since you can put anything in name, but I pulled out anyways, the name, the address, and then this is the good part, I had the latitude and the longitude. And then the place ID. So once I had the place ID, I would do a second call and pick out, you know, do a detail search, and, you know, I've had my place ID so I could find it for that specific place and get the name, the format, the phone number and the website. So this is how those two things connect. And I was just printing them out as I processed each line. I was going to print them out as a tab separated, which I'll show you on the next page. This was actually I was using Jupyter Notebook. So print out that line, and then so you'd see I'd get each out of this big mess of JSON. You could get the name of a food place, the address, and latitude, longitude. And as it turned out, even though they say you can't rely on the places giving you the right place name, in this case, all the place names matched on both sides. So I had you know, a lot of information on the food that was nearby. And this is what after I, what I came out with. And as you can see, you've got the latitude, longitude. So this could get loaded into a GIS program, produce a map, and also have information like on the back, we just printed, name, address, phone number. So if somebody couldn't, like I said, the Wi-Fi wasn't perfect, they could find some place to eat. So this is how that little thing was produced. Now, another thing I want to mention, Elaine, because this is a commercial product, it is not open source. You are going to deal with billing, though that isn't as odious as it sounds. If you want to use this API, you have a Google account, you create a project. That's where you're going to get your API. And then you have to have what they call a billing account connected. And how it works is they give you, $300 worth of credit, not $300, but you get what they call $300 worth of credit to start. And then after that, you're going to be given $200 in credit per month. Now, what I ended up using on my project, just as an example, was 0.6 something credits. So grabbing a half a dozen addresses to create a data set was not terribly expensive, but I still had to have a credit card attached to this. And for public programs like nonprofits, they have this is their list: crisis response, different types of teaching, teaching faculty, and transportation agencies. They do let people apply to have more, different types of accounts. But I just used a straight account, and this is another. I took a screenshot. This is basically, I had never seen this before. So if you've never seen this, this is kind of what your cloud platform looks like. And part of why I want to bring this up is it shows you, maybe I did, to produce my little data set with a few tries, I did 26 requests. And then down below there, it shows my usage ended up being, credit usage was 0.6.20. So,
and Jamie, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to, is it possible to wrap up so that we can have our other presenter go? Okay, wonderful.
And this is the last thing. So, put a cap on your charge. And that's basically, I don't need to go over that. Basically, I said, don't go over $25. So that's it. All right. And I'm going to put a link to to how to find information on this. Okay.
Wonderful, Jamie. Thank you. And I guess in terms of managing the time, if there's any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat and Jamie can follow up with those directly, or if there's more time, we can do that. So Ella, go ahead and share your screen, and I'll say Ella Turenne is an artist and student in the PhD program in visual studies at UC Irvine with an emphasis in race and justice studies. Her research focuses on Black feminist theory and visual culture. So Ella, go ahead and take it from here.
Thank you so much, Amy, for your introduction. So again, my name is Ella Tran. I'm a third-year doctoral student in visual studies at UC Irvine. And at the core of my work, it's always focused on the intersection of art and social justice and a preoccupation of how one can be in service of the other. This project, which I'm going to be scrolling through and showing you parts of my GIS story map today, it began with my experience working with young people in higher education and carceral settings, and has resulted in the map that I will share. This was my first experience with story maps, so I also want to thank Krista Christensen and Kelsey Statham for their support in designing and conducting research for this project, as well as Professor Sora Han at UCI for her incredible support and guidance. So the journey of storytelling, reflection, and interrogation begins with a quote from Angela Davis, whose work has taught me to stretch the boundaries of freedom to engage in Black feminist practice and to always be working towards abolition. And she says, "I don't believe we can see radical change without art." Her quote helps me think about the work that I and many other artist practitioners have facilitated in carceral settings. And one of my central questions in this work is whether that work contributes to the work of abolition. As an organizer on issues of mass incarceration, there is sometimes a sentiment that to do this work props up a system that is already oppressive, that the abolition work that is necessary can only happen externally, pushing against the system. But what of the people inside? What of the current status of the caged bodies whose desire for freedom is just as valid as the desire to dismantle the entire system and the walls around them? Can we have a goal to free bodies and spirits and minds and also dismantle the walls? Is there a way to tackle these goals simultaneously? And should we not, as Miles Horton says, make the road by walking? In her book, Marking Time, Nicole Fleetwood talks about the way in which incarcerated people use various carceral aesthetics to create art. She's considering penal space, the geography of confinement, penal time, the temporalities of incarceration, and penal matter, the materiality of incarceration, including the body itself. And we can see how each of these elements is used by artists to express their ideals, their goals, their pains, frustration, dreams, and joys. And this gives us insight into spaces we on the outside don't necessarily have access to. This geography of incarceration includes the physical space as well as the psychological space of carcerality. And in this way, incarcerated people's art and art making serves to reimagine life outside of penal space and in spite of the carceral state. So I'm using story maps in this instant to think about all of these questions and also chart my own interventions in juvenile halls on opposite sides of the coast, New York and Los Angeles. And to locate this abolitionist work in these spaces is allowing me to draw comparisons and interrogate what the work is doing. My road has taken me from Rikers Island, New York, part of the country's largest jail system, to Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall in Los Angeles, part of the country's second largest jail system in the country. Although geographically, as you can see in this first slide on the story map, these facilities are on opposite coasts. They have a lot in common as being the two largest jail systems in the country. And these are spaces where I learned to think more expansively about abolition, especially in concert with young people. One of the first encounters that with what I called is counter-abolitionist art was this piece here called Choose Your Green. And this is a piece that I actually recreated because it's a mural that's located at Rikers Island in the jail there. And with all of the research and the students who were helping me with this project, we could not find a replica of this image, but it is kind of seared in my brain. It's a clear message to the young men who were incarcerated there. And I wondered what impact it had on their psyche as they had to encounter this image on a daily basis. And how it impacted me as I was determined to create space for an alternative to that message. So what follows here, and I can make this available to folks, is how I've used story maps to chronicle this kind of intervention, to document the work at Rikers and LP, short for Los Padrinos. This is a collection of personal narrative as well as cultural production resulting from a class that I taught at both locations called Lyrics on Lockdown. Lyrics on Lockdown was a project of the Blackout Arts Collective. It began as a national tour building awareness and organizing about the prison industrial complex. And then it morphed into a national movement, organizing not just around awareness, but really connecting with local grassroots movements and building campaigns year round. In 2004, I created a course called Lyrics on Lockdown, and that's since been taught at Columbia, NYU, the University of Maryland, and the New School and Occidental College. And hundreds of college students and incarcerated youth were able to come together, and together being the operative word, because these classes were actually facilitated within these jails, within these juvenile halls, as a way to really talk about and critique the prison industrial complex. What I found that was powerful about the story maps was the ability to combine a number of elements together side by side. So I have my personal narrative as a reflection of the work. I have my analysis of the work. I have my pedagogical methods that I can also outline within the work. and I have the work that's actually produced by the pedagogy. So I'm going to give an example of how that comes together, but I just want to walk through some of the elements of the map. So here in the first section is kind of the introduction. This second section is really highlighting the work at Rikers Island. So it talks about on the narrative side here, I talk about the first time that I went there, the kinds of exercises and activities I did with my students. And while you can scroll through this part, on the other side is actually a brief documentary that I put together about my experience there, which highlights not only some of the students, some of the college students that I worked with, but we also, we would take the bus in New York. If anybody's ever been to Rikers Island, there is one bus that goes there. And so we one day hung out at the bus stop and talked to people about their experiences having to go visit loved ones at Rikers Island. And they also read some of the poems written by some of the young people who were there. So that's in the brief documentary there. So, and then the second part, some of this also pulls together art that was made by the students and also existed in the facility outside of the class. So bringing together connections of not only the artwork that we did, but also the artwork that took place in other spaces. And then the second part of this is what we did at LP. So bringing together some of the artwork again that the young people made outside of our program, but bringing together the narratives of what it was like to create art with young women who were incarcerated. So really quickly, I want to think about this element of all of these pieces that I talked about: personal narrative, pedagogy, cultural work coming, and how it comes together. So earlier I talked about Nicole Fleetwood's development of penal time, space, and matter. And I'd like to add another element to these carceral aesthetics, and we can think about that as penal sound. It can be considered as the sonic interventions in the carceral state. In recent years, for instance, a number of podcasts have been developed, many produced by incarcerated people, voicing the experiences of those most directly impacted by the system. Now, one of the ways that we did this in class was to create a human symphony. The students first engaged in a discussion about the origins of hip hop and the socioeconomic political reasons for its birth. And from there, they launched into a description of the 5 elements of hip hop. And one of the things that we did was to illustrate beatboxing, we participated in a game called Vocal Jam. Everyone would be in a circle and one student begins by creating a sound, and each student within the circle builds on that sound until everybody is contributing. Contributing and creating sound that is simply built off of the human voice and the materials that are in the room. So I'll just play a brief clip of this so that you can hear what it sounds like. So just in the interest of time, you can hear us vocalizing and banging on the desks that were in the room. And although this didn't start out as a choreographed song, it naturally coalesced into this orchestra of rebellion. So we were disrupting penal time, finding penal space, and creating sound. In conclusion, we can think of art and art making as an intervention which in many ways facilitates the intersection of extracted bodies back into existence. And it demonstrates that in the exhibits, it's in the exhibits featuring works of incarcerated people. It's in the books of poetry and prose written by unfree men and women. It's in the work I have shared with you here. Art and art making disrupts the extraction of time, allowing for incarcerated people to reclaim time back as they are making this creative work. And it reconfigures these penal elements, whether it be materials or the perception of the materials or the ways in which bodies move and are situated within these spaces. And finally, it pushes towards abolition, which, if we are thinking about it expansively, includes personal, physical, and mental freedom, as well as sharing perspective and those working towards abolition of systems of oppression. The ability for inside artists to articulate and contribute to an abolitionist agenda is critical if we are to think about abolition holistically and expansively. Thank you.
Wow, Ella, that was phenomenal to sort of see how that's all pulled together and to really sort of tell, you know, another story, right? And the sides of something that's not necessarily seen, or just being able to pull out those voices. So incredible. Any questions? I can see we're sort of at time. And I'll say if there's anything, welcome to ask. And I guess I have one question, but I see we're at time, so I want to be cognizant of that. There is a survey that Aaron just posted the link in. It's a survey for the entire event. So at some point within the next 3 days, take a focus and just fill that out for us. But I guess, Ella, in thinking about this, did you have your students also help create sort of the story maps to pull sort of a different perspective and a different story together, as well as sort of understanding those?
Yeah, so part of what we did was, since this was my first time, I really relied on one of the students who was experienced to help me think about how to pull the stories together conceptually. And then I had another student who helped do research on the artwork in both of those facilities, so we could see how some of that artwork overlapped with the work that I had been doing when I was there, the juvenile hall. So some of that is reflected in the story map as well. Like the picture, the mural of Angela Davis was something that the girls who were there created, and some of the things that sort of like the pedagogy and the theoretical underpinnings of what I was doing was so heavily influenced by Davis. So it made for natural connections there.
Wow, great. So, and Ella, at some point, I know that there's probably people interested. I know I am, as I in the story map, sharing that within the chat, if you will, or if not, we can take it and we'll make it available in our Slack channels as well. And again, these sessions are all being recorded, so we'll be able to post them online, and you'll be able to follow up with sessions you didn't get to attend, or even those that you want to revisit. So thank you, Ella, for putting that in the chat. I guess thank you for joining. I want to give a special round of applause, virtual, if you will, to all of our presenters today. And join us tomorrow. You'll see the agenda online. That's the best place to go to the most up-to-date information on the website. And again, we look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. So thank you again to all of our presenters today, and enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you online tomorrow. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.